All right, welcome back. This is Unit 5, Video 2, and we are talking about Greece. And last time we left off with the two iconic Greek city-states, Athens and Sparta, and how they kind of each represented the two camps that were within Greece. One side, Athens, um, focusing more on democracy and beauty and things of that nature. And then you have Sparta on the other side that was much more rigid and disciplined and more about the glorification of the state. So now we're getting into the fateful century where the two sides of the city states are duking it out. I should say we'll get there, but then first, they also have some enemies coming in, particularly the Persians. So, at the outset of the 5th century BC, the westward advance of the Persian Empire threatened Greek independence and isolation. The Persians were expanding into Asia Minor. They had already conquered the Lydians, as well as some Greek colonies that were located on the coast bordering the Aegean Sea. Now, those that were conquered, the Greek colonies, they were treated fairly by the Persians, but the Greeks very much valued independence and self-sufficiency, and so they could not tolerate Persian authority. With the support of Athens, the Greek colonies rebelled and overthrew Persian rule. So, with Athens' help, they overthrew the Persians, these little colonies. Now, that was when the Persians were under King Darius the First. And after this initial rebellion by the Greek colonies, the Persians decided to crush the revolt. And they wanted to punish Athens for helping the rebellion. Now, it is important to note that this is the same Darius that is mentioned in Ezra 6. Um, God used him to aid in the reconstruction of the Temple of God at Jerusalem. In 490 BC, a Persian force landed at the Bay of Marathon, about 25 miles north of Athens. So, even though outnumbered and seemingly doomed for destruction, the Athenian army marched to meet the mighty Persian army. Surprised to see the advancing Greek army, the Persians were unable to fully use their cavalry, on which they had heavily relied before. So instead, they found themselves engaged in hand-to-hand combat, and they were no match for the physical strength and battle skill of the Greek soldier. So the Greeks won a crazy, decisive victory against the Persians at the Battle of Marathon. So, here, just to give you some context, this Herodotus is probably one of the best known ancient historians, and this is what he had to say about the Battle of Marathon. So when the battle was set in array, instantly the Athenians charged the barbarians, aka the Persians, at a run. Now the distance between the two armies was little short of 1 mile. The Persians, therefore, when they saw the Greeks coming on at a speed, made ready to receive them, although it seemed to them that the Athenians were bereft of their senses, and bent upon their own destruction for they saw a mere handful of men coming on at a run without either horsemen or archers. Such was the opinion of the barbarians. But the Athenians, in close array, fell upon them and fought in a manner worthy of being recorded. So that was an ancient historian's perspective on the Bay of Marathon. Now we're going to move on to the Battle of Thermopylae. So King Darius, organized a full-scale invasion of Greece, but he died before it could get carried out. And his son Xerxes would renew the struggle. He would keep it going. He amassed a great invasion force of men, ships, and supplies, crossing the Hellespont um, on a bridge made of boats And that was incredible at the time. This nothing ever had been done like this before. But he like roped all these boats together so the whole army could walk across them. So the Persian army marched towards Greece because of their boat bridge. And in 480 BC, the Persians, accompanied by their large fleet of ships, made their way down to the Greek coast. And the Greeks differed on how best to defend their cities. The Spartans suggested that the Greek mass their force across the Corinthian isthmus and defend the Peloponnesus. The Athenians objected to this plan because it would leave Athens exposed to the Persian army. The Greeks finally decided to take their stand at the mountain pass of Thermopylae, north of most of the city-states. At Thermopylae, a force of about 7,000 Greeks confronted the advancing Persian army. And according to our ancient historian Herodotus, who could never resist improving the story, the Persians numbered about 3 million. It's actually more likely that they were about at 200,000. Um, though outnumbered, though, the Greeks had a good position since only a small number of the Persian army could advance through the narrow pass at one time. So then um, the Persians attacked 3 times, but they could not take the pass. And it looked like the Greeks were winning. But then a Greek trader showed the Persians another way through the mountains. And when the Greeks realized that they were almost surrounded, they retreated. But 300 Spartans, along with several hundred Greeks from Thespia and Thebes, remained to hold the pass. All 300 Spartans fought to the death, as well as many of the other Greeks that remained. And according to Herodotus, these are his words, they defended themselves to the last, such as still has swords using them, and the others resisting with their hands and teeth. Oof. And now there's a monument at the spot, even to this day, that bore these words, "Tell them in Sparta, passerby, that here, obedient to their orders, we lie." And that is the story of the 300, the Spartan 300 that you've probably heard before. So this keeps on going on. So we have Bay of Marathon, Greeks win, Battle of Thermopylae, Persians win. Now we're going to the Battle of Salamis Bay. So once past the Greek barrier, the Persians swept on into Athens and they burned it to the ground. Now, most of the Athenians had already left the city, realizing that they would not be able to defend it, and they withdrew to the island called Salamis, just off the coast. Hoping to exploit Xerxes' desire for a quick victory, Themistocles, the leader of Athens, devised a trap, and he sent a trusted slave to Xerxes with a story that the Greeks were frightened and were planning to escape in the morning by sailing northward. The slave also suggested that if Xerxes were to send his ships into the strait between the mainland and Salamis, he would be able to block their escape. So, the next morning, Xerxes ordered his fleet with many of his soldiers on board to attack the Greeks. The Persians entered the strait just as Themistocles had hoped, and the rising morning tide and narrow space made their massive large ships hard to maneuver. And as the Persian sailors struggled to steer their crafts, the Greeks launched their ships from the beaches at Salamis, and they were small boats and they were easy to maneuver. And this created great confusion as they rammed and sank many of the bulky Persian vessels. And from a high vantage point overlooking the bay, Xerxes watched as the Greeks carried the day, and they won. The following year, the Greeks, led by Sparta, defeated a sizable Persian army that had remained in northern Greece. Although they had stopped the Persian invasion, the Greeks did little to weaken the actual Persian Empire. The Persians would continue to interfere in Greek affairs for more than a century following these wars. Yet the Greek maintained their hard-fought independence, which was a huge win. And the freedom bolstered the Greek spirit, furthered the growth of democracy, and encouraged Greek creativity. The way was prepared for the golden age of Greece. And that's the era we remember the most, the period of great cultural achievement. Now, it's also important to note that this is not only is this the Darius in the Bible, but this is also the Xerxes that we see in the Bible in the story of Esther. This was the man, the king that she married. So Xerxes has all of this humbling Persian War experience right before Esther's story begins. That's pretty crazy, right? And now you understand why in the opening chapter of Esther with Queen Vashti, we see him doing all of this stuff to vaunt and showcase for the guests and dignitaries there his might and power and everything. He was really overcompensating for what had happened at the Battle of Salamis Bay. And when Vashti did not comply with his request, which was a bad thing, and she should not have, um, this was almost like for him, he saw it as putting salt in his wound. And so that was what would end up leading to the whole story of Esther. But it's cool to see the pre-story to Esther's story is right here with these Persian wars. And this was what was going on with the king of the Persian Empire before Esther entered his life. So, as we're finishing up on this slide, remember the Bay of Marathon, Greeks win, Battle of Thermopylae, Persians win, Battle of Salamis Bay, the Greeks win. Let's move on to our next age of Greek history, the Periclean age. Nowhere in Greece following the Persian Wars was the spirit of patriotism and self-confidence stronger than in Athens. It became the leading city-state of Greece because of its heroic efforts against the Persians. Other city-states looked to Athens for protection. The Athenians encouraged the formation of a defensive alliance among the Greek city-states to protect themselves against the further Persian attacks. This alliance would be known as the Delian League, and Athens was its leader. The period of Greek history from 460 to 429 BC is often called the Age of Pericles. And for over 30 years, Pericles was the influential leader of Athens. During this time, Athens attained cultural heights unparalleled in the ancient world. It's it encouraged advances in art and science and literature and drama and architecture and government. So numerous and notable were the Greek accomplishments during this period that we're going to have some special attention just devoted to these few things um, in our notes. Under Pericles' leadership, every adult male citizen of Athens gained the privilege and responsibility of sharing in the Athenian government by being able to vote and hold office. No longer was the government controlled only by those of wealth or of noble birth. Now, all adult male citizens could participate in government on an equal basis. And the majority of people of Athens, however, were still women, slaves, and foreigners, and were still excluded from these privileges. But even so, this was a huge suffrage movement in Greek culture in the ancient world to not have to own land to be a part of the government. So this was like an era of suffrage within the ancient world. Even though it was not complete, it was still a huge step. So, what happens between Athens and Athens and Sparta during this huge era of Greek culture? Well, the Periclean age came between two violent upheavals in the 5th century. The first was the Persian Wars, which temporarily united the Greek city-states in a common defense of their liberty. We already talked about that. Then we have the Golden Age a bit, and then comes the Peloponnesian War. This is from 431 to 404 BC, and it's a devastating war pitting one alliance of Greek city-states against another. So, as Athens had grown in influence and wealth, it began to transform the Delian League into an Athenian empire. And Sparta becomes really alarmed over the commercial and political power that Athens has acquired. And so there's this tension between these two rivals and their allies, and they're finally flamed into war. The Peloponnesian War, has been likened to a struggle between an elephant and a whale. Sparta's strength rested in its land army, whereas Athens and its large fleet reigned supreme in the sea. So early in the war, there's a devastating plague that wiped out a large portion of the population in Athens, including its leading citizen, Pericles. Though weakened by their losses, Athens continues to fight even without their main leader. Sparta eventually gained the advantage by forming an alliance with the Persians. Yeah, everybody in Greece was aghast that Sparta did that. Brought the Persians into their own domestic affairs. What? So, Sparta gained the advantage by aligning or making an alliance with the Persians. And when they did that, they were finally able to conquer Athens by destroying the Athenian fleet. So, although Sparta emerges victorious, it had nothing but problems after the Civil War. It's kind of like a civil war. City-states that looked to Sparta for deliverance from Athenian domination now found themselves under a greater oppressor. Democratic governments were replaced with oligarchies. The Greeks who had experienced freedom found it difficult to submit to the Spartan oligarchical form. Constant uprisings reduced Sparta's control over the Greek city-states, leaving them disunited once again. And so, with Greek in a very disunited state, someone's going to enter into this power vacuum. And we see that it's going to be Alexander the Great. So, north of Greece was a country called Macedonia, or an area called Macedonia, and it was inhabited by a people related to the Greeks. King Philip II united Macedonia under his rule and extended his kingdom into Greece. Many Greek city-states supported Philip, hoping that he would bring unity to their land. Some resisted him, fearing that their freedom would be lost under Macedonian rule. So the weakened and divided Greek city-states were no match for the well-organized army of Philip. Philip's appreciation for the Greek culture led him to treat his many subjects with great tolerance, and he hoped to gain Greek support for an invasion of the Persian army. So and he thought they already have a vendetta against them. They're pretty much the Persians are the Greeks' constant enemy, so maybe I can team up with them. But in 336 BC, before he could fulfill his plans, Philip was assassinated, and his son Alexander assumed the throne at age 20. As a boy, Alexander had been taught by one of the greatest philosophers, Aristotle, and he had instilled in him a love of Greek philosophy, and Greek culture. So, with his conquering armies, he actually carried the Greek culture to the far reaches of the Near Eastern world. And that is why the Greek culture and ideas and inventions are so pervasive, even in the ancient world. It's because of the movement of Alexander the Great during his conquest. So, with amazing speed, Alexander led his army across Asia Minor and confronted the Persian army led by King Darius III. In the heat of one battle, Darius fled, leaving behind his wife, mother, and children to be taken captive by Alexander. Yeah, not a good dude. Alexander took Syria, destroyed the city of Tyre, and marched unopposed into Egypt. The final blow to the Persian Empire came as Alexander, near the Tigris River, is where they're at, defeated the large army of Darius. Alexander had accomplished what he had set out to do, avenge the Persian invasion of Greece and become the king of Asia. But his thirst for conquest was not yet satisfied. He marched all the way to India and would have gone beyond, but his weary army refused to go any farther. They had fought for 8 years and had marched over 11,000 miles. Alexander sulked over the unwillingness of his army to continue. Although he had conquered almost all the known world of that day, his achievements had not brought any lasting satisfaction to his heart. And how often do people do this? How often men have tried to satisfy their soul's desire by seeking the fleeting pleasures of this world? Alexander would not have been satisfied even if he had conquered the whole world. We know that the Bible says, "For what is a man profited if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul? Or what shall a man give in exchange for his soul?" That's from Matthew 16, verse 26. And we see this never enough sensation with Alexander. Well, in 323 BC, at the height of his power, Alexander died of a fever in Babylon. Yes, in Nebuchadnezzar's palace. He had not yet reached his 33rd birthday because Alexander left no plans for a successor for his empire because he didn't imagine himself dying. His chief generals fought among themselves to determine who would rule. So these new kings fought one another as they each tried to restore the whole empire under his own rule. For the families of three of Alexander's generals came dynasties that ruled portions of the former empire until the Roman conquests. The Ptolemies in Egypt, the Seleucids in Syria and Persia, and the Antigonids in Macedonia and Greece. Alexander will be remembered as one of the world's greatest military leaders. His empire spread across the world from Greece to India and included most of the capitals of the early civilizations. He founded cities that became centers of learning and culture. He brought cartographers and mapped the majority of the ancient world. And some of these he named after himself, the places that he went and the places he mapped, such as Alexandria in Egypt. Um, so through his conquests, he spread Greek culture and language to the east. And although his empire split soon after his death, the Greek culture remained a vital force in the ancient world. And that is where we're going to leave off today. I hope this was helpful. Please let me know if you have any questions about the Peloponnesian Wars, right? So first was Persian Wars, then the Golden Age, then the Peloponnesian Wars. Make sure you keep that timeline straight in your head. All right, guys, I'll see you in video 3 for Unit 5. Bye.